It is November 26, 2024. And as we get into the holidays here in the US, tensions are higher than ever on the international stage as you see the Biden administration marching the US right towards World War III against Russia. And that's despite the fact that the winner of the 2024 election was the candidate who promised to end the war in Ukraine. Now you have Donald Trump building his incoming cabinet, which is set to take shape with his administration come January, and a lot of concerns about what that looks like, given some of the neocons that he has thrown in there and what that will mean for his decision making once he returns to the White House. Now, all of this is also happening as the mainstream media seems to be trying just to figure it out right now, right? They're clearly not happy with the influence of independent voices and alternative media on social media. They're not happy with the fact that Russiagate and social media censorship have not worked to completely root out all alternative media and independent journalists all around. So, where does that leave our country? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier. So, let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Jimmy Dore, a comedian, political analyst, author, and host of the Jimmy Dore Show. Jimmy, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm glad I get to talk to you today. I know that there is a lot going on in the world, even as we get into the holidays here in the US. But I want to get your take on kind of where the current climate here in the US stands right now, because we have the Biden administration. They confirmed this week that they have lifted restrictions on Kiev's use of long range missiles on Russian territory, despite repeated warnings from Russia that they see this as a direct attack from the US. Now, when it comes to the American people, we did not vote for direct war against Russia, but a lot of Americans did vote for a candidate, that being Donald Trump, who said that he wanted to end the war in Ukraine. So, how do you view where we currently stand as it seems like the Biden administration is using what should be a lame duck season to get us awfully close to World War III?
It's kind of mind blowing that there isn't more outrage about what's happening exactly. We've been told that Donald Trump is a madman who can't be allowed to have his finger on the nuclear button, and that Joe Biden and his administration were the adults in the room. And of course, the exact opposite is true. Joe Biden, of course, is too demented to be making any decisions. So, he's not. He can't even read a teleprompter anymore. So, who is pulling the strings? Well, it's the handful of billionaires who are psychopaths and want complete control of the world, and they're willing to risk a nuclear war to do so. And that's exactly what's happening. Again, I think the reason why there isn't more outrage over this is because we only have 6 media companies in the United States. They're all owned by the same people who want this war to happen, the military-industrial complex, and so they don't report it in a way that makes people excited. People got more excited about a COVID virus that had a 99.5% survivability rate than they are about a potential nuclear war that's for real. The nuclear, they have the clock, the Armageddon clock, and it's closer to midnight doomsday than ever before. I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, where people were constantly afraid of nuclear war. Sting was, they had hit songs about it, please make sure. They had TV shows and specials and movies, and everybody was always afraid of nuclear war. And so then we finally had nuclear peace treaties, which George Bush and everybody else started getting us out of them. And now here we are, hearing that Joe Biden is allowing, first of all, Ukraine can't send those long range missiles into Russia without U.S. soldiers actually doing it. So we're actually sending the soldiers, we're sending the missiles. This is beyond psychopathic, is what's happening right now. And the only people I see in the media really screaming about it is Joe Rogan. Well, he has a huge platform, but nobody else. So the tip of the hat to Joe Rogan for doing that, and shame on everybody else for pretending like this is somehow normal, and that what's going on with this neocon administration of Joe Biden's isn't completely antithetical to what the United States citizens just voted for. They want to end these wars. They don't want this war. They've been lied to about the Ukraine war, and that's what I think is the biggest thing is that the news media will never tell you how it started. They always start the story about the Ukraine war in the third act, which was when Putin invaded Ukraine, the Donbass. That's not when this started. This started probably in the 90s when we told the Russians that we wouldn't expand NATO. And then, of course, we put 16 new countries in. And now we're right up to the border putting nuclear missiles and to putting Ukraine into NATO, threatening to do so. And so we overthrew their democratically elected government in 2014 in the Maidan coup. We got in bed with right-wing Nazis to do it. It was a CIA-sponsored coup. This is the part of the story that the American people are never told. This is the part of the story Jon Stewart will never tell his viewers, that no one will ever tell the truth about what actually that Rachel Maddow won't tell you, Anderson Cooper, Sean Hannity. They won't, the New York Times, they won't tell you this part of the story. And the part of the story is that we've provoked this. And the point is, we thought Russia would be weaker. By the way, we also did the Nord Stream pipeline, which right Europe, and we destroyed their economy, right? So that was a pipeline that brought cheap energy to Germany, and the United States blew it up. We now know it's confirmed. And it skyrocketed energy prices for Germany. It's wrecked their economy, and Germany is the economy of Europe. Everybody's hurting through this war, except ironically Russia. Russia now is closer with China. Their economy and their currency is stronger than ever. And who's experiencing inflation? Who's experiencing bad economy? It's the United States and Europe. And again, the people, you're told by the media that's bought by the military industrial complex that somehow Joe Biden and his administration are the sensible grown-up adults in the room. They are not. They are psychopathic neocons who want nothing more than more war and more war. Right now, they're funding a genocide in Israel, and everybody seems to give them a pass for that. So anyway, I know that's a long answer to your question of where we're at, but that's where we're at, and we're actually closer to nuclear war than ever.
Yeah, and I think that you make really great points. And it's interesting to me how you were pointing out the fact that just a few decades ago, this was something that we were legitimately concerned about. And it's like now in 2024, we're watching these escalations and just kind of going, oh, it's no big deal, right? Russia just test fired a nuclear capable medium range missile and made it clear that, hey, there's no way for any of you to intercept this. And the US is just sitting here going, oh, we're just going to keep ramping up tensions more and more. Now, when it comes to the role that the mainstream media play in this, I feel like every year we get a new Gallup poll talking about how Americans just don't trust the media. And I think that that's true. Most Americans don't. But as you were pointing out there, they still do have a hand in, I would say, impacting the way that the public thinks with what they cover, right? If they're coming out going, we need to be concerned about World War III and we need to be talking about the doomsday clock, then a lot more people would be more concerned about it. But because they're not, because they're so focused on, Orange Man bad returning to the White House and everything else that they say comes with that, it doesn't seem like there is as much panic. How do you see the role that the media is playing and the fact that Americans we can say that we don't trust the mainstream media, but yet we're still listening, we're still tuning in, and it's still having an effect?
Well, it certainly has an effect. It's again, most people. I like to say the U.S. citizens are the most propagandized people in the world, and they don't know it. Other countries are aware. Like in North Korea, their people are aware that they're getting propagandized. In the old Soviet Union, they were aware that it was propaganda. China also. In the United States, they think they're really getting the truth when they read the New York Times, when they tell them that Tulsi Gabbard, who's an officer in the armed forces right now in the military, is somehow a Russian traitor. I mean, they believe that seed oils are good for them. They believe that the boosters are necessary. They believe anything that is put in the New York Times, the Washington Post, because again, there's no. But the one good bright spot is that Twitter. Which is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and it's owned by a tech billionaire who's also a defense contractor. But for, but he has allowed more truth to come out on that social media app than has ever been allowed to come out in any corporate media or any other social media app. And so people are, it's now turned into the number one place where people go to get their news. And so people can actually get a counter narrative to the establishment at Twitter. And I think that's fantastic. And right now they're screaming about it. Morning Joe and the head of Axios just got an award from the National Press Club, and he was screaming, almost foaming at the mouth, about how we're the real news and Twitter isn't.
Elon Musk sits on Twitter every day, or X today, saying like, we are the media, you are the media. My message to Elon Musk is bullshit.
Well, I think you protest too much.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why people don't turn to the establishment news anymore, and they're turning away from it. It's because we're tired of being lied to, and we know that you're bought and paid for by corporations, big pharma, Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, which is why you told us up until 5 seconds ago that Joe Biden was sharp and focused. They were telling us that I knew Joe Biden was demented in 2020 when he got elected, and then it just got accelerated, and they were telling us he was sharp. So people, they're constantly lying to the American people, and they're upset now that people are turning to alternatives for their media. Places like this, places like Twitter, places like YouTube, Rumble, to get their news. And so I say that, right now they're talking about selling off MSNBC. They're talking about, because nobody wants to watch it anymore. CNN is shuttering their biggest hosts because they can't afford them, and so these are all good signs. I think the establishment media needs to go away. It's all bought by corporate media. There is no firewall between the advertising department and the news reporting department. It's exactly the same. They all know where their bread is buttered. Don Lemon admitted it, that of course our advertisers influence. Well, I know what I can say and how much I cannot say. He's said that. There's video of him saying that. And so now he's doing a YouTube show nobody watches, because nobody needs to go to YouTube to get that same garbage they can get at CNN right now. So unfortunately, there was a thing called when I grew up, again, there used to be 50 giant media companies. They were still giant and power was consolidated, but there was 50 of them, right? So you could get more news and there was more diversity of opinion. In 1996, Bill Clinton passed the Telecommunications Act, which took us from 50 giant media companies down to 6. And reporters used to come from blue collar backgrounds, and they weren't looking to make friends with the elite and the establishment. They were looking to expose them and stick their thumb in their eye. Well, now, because there's only 6 companies, all the reporters know they're going to work for one of these billionaire owned companies. So, and they don't come from blue collar backgrounds anymore. They get hand chosen by the billionaires who run those media companies from Ivy League institutions. And why do they do that? Because they know they're going to be class loyal. And that's exactly what's happened. The guy who's Jeff Bezos handpicked Dave Weigel to cover progressive news in the Washington Post. Dave Weigel comes from Northwestern University, who did pro-Iraq war rallies when he was the editor of the Northwestern newspaper. Of course, that's the guy billionaire Jeff Bezos handpicks to cover progressive. He picks a right-wing warmongering maniac. So those are the kind of people who are covering the news right now, handpicked from Ivy League schools, and they know they're going to be class loyal, which is why you can't get the real news about anything, which is why they tell you Bernie Sanders' plans can't work, and then they call him a sexist and a misogynist, and his followers are violent, and he's also got Russiagated. But Bernie's such a weakling, he went along with it, right? They did Russiagate. They're still doing it, right? They're doing it to Tulsi right now. So anyway, it's again, that's another long answer to your question. But yes, unfortunately, the establishment media still has a lot of influence, especially with the shit lib friends that I have in Hollywood, or ex-friends, because they can't. I've had people brag to me. I go, where do you get your information? With people who are talking about the Ukraine war. And and he said, oh, I'm enjoying watching Putin get his ass kicked across Ukraine. I'm like, where do you get your news from? And they said, oh, he goes, I read 3 newspapers a day. Yeah. Do you know they're all owned by the same people? They have no idea that they're getting propaganda. So that's the big tragedy of America, is that the people are the most propagandized in the world, and they have no idea.
Oh, absolutely. And it's always interesting for me, those people who only pay attention to the mainstream media coverage on Ukraine, because then when you have the Washington Post and the New York Times start to admit that Ukraine isn't doing as well as they initially claimed that it was, I'm going, are those people just the most confused, right? Are they reading the new article and going, what in the world happened? This is not what I expected. I guess they may be. But I do want to ask you about the incoming Trump administration. Trump has lined up his cabinet. And I will be the first to say here, right? I'm a bit concerned about some of the neocons he has thrown into his cabinet, as we saw it with the first term. The people he surrounds himself with, they are very much in his ear. While he has said that he wants to end the war in Ukraine, he is still very, very pro-Israel, as they are carrying out an all-out genocide of the Palestinians that the U.S. is completely enabling. So how do you see how the Trump administration is taking shape when it comes to his cabinet and kind of what we could be in for come January?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of concerning picks, to say the least. I was sad to see Matt Gaetz drop out. He seemed to be the target of a honeypot operation, which I just covered on my show, which no one else seems to be covering, even though the Twitter thread about it's got over millions of views, 46,000 likes. The establishment media will not report this story. So that was a big, because Matt Gaetz has been great. He doesn't, take the donor money. He's exposing the corruption, the financial corruption inside Congress. He's exposing. He's good on antitrust. So he's kind of he's a populist and a fighter. He's an outlier inside of his own party. So now he's even dropped out of Congress, even though he was reelected. So I think that's a real tragedy. I would love to see him be Attorney General. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of the Treasury, the UN. I mean, he's got a lot of Zionists in his cabinet, and so, but he ran as a Zionist, so I guess you have to expect that. Only thing I can hope is that him and JD Vance, Trump has said recently that we shouldn't be trying to do a regime change in Iran. We can't run our own country. We shouldn't. We should. So that was that. I mean, that's why he's gotten such demonization from the establishment media, because the establishment media is mouthpieces of the military-industrial complex and the deep state, which work hand in hand. But let's remember, as Chuck Schumer revealed in 2016 on Rachel Maddow's show, that the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA do not work for the president. And how do I know that? Because Chuck Schumer said it was dumb for Trump to criticize the intelligence community. And when asked why is that dumb for him to do that, and he said, because if you go against the intelligence community, they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back at you.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
And so that's called a gaffe, because he accidentally told the truth. That's a gaffe in Washington. What Chuck Schumer revealed there was that the intelligence community doesn't actually work for the president of the United States, and that the president of the United States better be afraid of them, and he better watch his P's and Q's around the. And so if they don't work for the president, who do they work for? That would have been the next follow-up question if I was interviewing him. But of course, he was being interviewed by Rachel Maddow, who actually works for the same people that the intelligence community does, the military-industrial complex. So yeah, we have to keep our eye. I'm very happy to see his pick for Tulsi Gabbard as the director of national intelligence. I'm great to see Bobby Kennedy get in there at the HHS. It's his CDC pick is good. I'm not crazy about his Surgeon General. Marco Rubio, his defense secretary. It remains, there's good and bad, right? But he's definitely not from the military industrial complex. And so we'll see. I mean, that's why the establishment media and the military industrial complex hated Trump, because the first time he ran as an anti-interventionist. He talked about getting our troops out of the Middle East. That's what he was all in fact, we now know that the Pentagon lied to him about troop levels in Syria because he wanted to draw them down, and they lied and said they did. So which should be that should be a much bigger story than it is, but it's not. And, Donald Trump has the crazy idea that the president of the United States, who is the commander in chief, should be the one who runs the intelligence community and runs the Pentagon. And that's what Russiagate was all about, to discredit him, to let him know you do not. run those things. We will dictate to you, the donor class, the military industrial complex, Wall Street. They dictate our foreign policy, not actually the president. So we don't really live in a democracy. And in that regard, Trump is trying to bring a little bit more democracy to our government right now. Will he be able to succeed? I don't know. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part to me, especially when I look at some of the comments that I've heard from, kind of the average Americans who, not even to say that they necessarily supported Trump, but one thing that I heard over and over again from a lot of people who did vote for Trump was that they wanted to see Bobby Kennedy in charge of Health and Human Services. They wanted to see what he could do, because when he's talking about making America healthy again, that's something that affects all of us, right? And there's so many things that we don't know about what's in our food or what's being sold to us by big pharma here in this country. And so I am curious too, because I know I can sometimes be a little bit cynical, right? I'm like, okay, it's great that, Trump chose RFK for this position, but will he be able to actually make any meaningful change given kind of the setup that we have here in this country? How do you look at that in terms of, I guess, where the optimism level stands, given all of the ways in which the US is kind of already set up and the powers that be still running things in this country?
Well, the establishment still opposes Trump. The establishment, they're the never Trumper Republicans, the Democratic Party, the establishment, which is again Wall Street military industrial complex. Even though Trump is a big friend of Wall Street, his Treasury Secretary is from the swamp. But with the push, the opposition to Bobby Kennedy and the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, is going to come from the establishment, Republicans and Democrats, right? So will they even allow? They're already ginning up plans to thwart his agenda, and they're already figuring out ways to stop him. And so, the irony is we don't live in a democracy. That's not hyperbole. We live in an oligarchy, which was proven by a Princeton study over 10 years ago now. And so when a session of Congress gets together, they're not there at the behest of workers or students or the average citizen. They're there to do the bidding of the donor class at the beginning, middle, and end. That's it. That's what this is. That's why we have the most unhealthy food. That's why they're allowed to put poisonous chemicals in our food in the United States that they're not allowed to use in Canada and Europe and around the world, but they do here in the United States. That's why the United States our now life expectancy is going backwards. We're the most obese country, the most unhealthy country, and we pay twice as much for our health care than the rest of the Western world. And we have way worse outcomes, right? So we're like 40th, right? We're way behind much smaller, more poorer countries. And so will Bobby Kennedy's going to have a big fight, not just getting elected, not just getting appointed, but just being able to implement his agenda. He's going up against the biggest, he's going up against big pharma. He's going up against big agriculture, the people who want to put our food, want to put chemicals in our food, the people who put glyphosate on everything we eat, which is poisonous, right? And which they don't do. That's why when I actually order my pasta, I get it from Italy. They don't spray their wheat with poison. We do that in the United States. So, it's the big pushback is the establishment, right? And Bobby's a populist, as is Trump, to an extent. And so all we can do is fingers crossed, and we need MAGA to hold their feet to the fire. We need MAGA to get out and make sure that Trump fulfills his promises and doesn't backtrack, and that Trump actually does drain the swamp. And hopefully he can control the neocons in his administration, that they're actually there. So, when he appointed Marco Rubio, that was a thank you to Sheldon Adelson's widow, because she gave him $100 million because they tried to bankrupt Trump with all those lawfare cases of $400 million. He didn't have the money he had the first time. He needed donors this time because of the lawfare. And so that's another thing. Hopefully, Trump and the attorney general clean out the rot inside the justice system. We all saw what happened. They will make you a criminal if the establishment doesn't like you, and that could be Donald Trump. That could be the Stop Cop City protesters in Atlanta. They use the same RICO statute and the same grand jury to indict Donald Trump as they did Stop Cop City protesters, right? So I tried to explain that to Cornel West when he was on my show, but of course he's lived in ivory towers his entire life, and he's out of touch and couldn't get it, and decided to call me a Trumper when I pointed that out. And I'm trying to point out that anybody who goes against the establishment and is a threat, they will use lawfare against. That's what they did to Julian Assange. That's what they did to Imran Khan. That's what they did. They do it to Trump here in January 6th, which we now know was an FBI psyop. They had FBI assets dressed up as MAGA supporters inside the Capitol before they ever started the riot. And that's what it was. It was a riot. It wasn't an insurrection. Really, a bunch of Second Amendment gun nuts went to the Capitol to overthrow the government, and they all forgot to bring their guns. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, the media and the Democrats said they have to lie and say that there were police killed on. Nobody was killed. The only person that was killed on that day was a protester. So anyway, again, that's another long answer to your question. Sorry, I keep going off on these rants.
No, you're good. I'm glad that I got the chance to talk to you today. And I think you laid it out perfectly when it comes down to it. We live in this society, and the media plays a big role in this, where they try to make it left versus right? We have all of this bread and circus, but at the end of the day, it's us versus the establishment, and the establishment knows exactly how to keep the American people compliant in a number of different ways. So it'll certainly be interesting to see how this plays out, right? What Trump does once he's in office, and of course, what we find out about as the American people, and exactly as you said, how hard people fight to really hold his feet to the fire and make him deliver on those campaign promises. Jimmy Dore, a comedian, political analyst, author, and host of The Jimmy Dore Show, thank you so much for your time and insight today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive deep dive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also catch Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.